too.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. It's there's different opinions out there, but the case, no matter what side of it you come down on, is pretty straightforward. So we'll present it for you here, starting simply with his career ranks, and this basically tells the story. The volume is the only issue if you're hesitant to vote for relief pitchers, but they're the numbers. What more can you say? Only Mariano Rivera had a lower ERA, an opponent's average, strikeout rate, and WHIP, all the lowest of all time. The WHIP, that's rounded up to one. It's actually just below one base runner per inning for his entire career. Now, you look at what he did at the end of his career, guys. We've talked about this before. His last 3 seasons, his numbers were actually better than his overall career mark. So it wasn't like he was slowing down at all. He just got to a point at 38 years old where he felt like he'd played enough and he was ready to walk away from the game and spend more time with his family. His last season was actually his best season by ERA, 1.43 ERA and 71 appearances. So still had plenty in the tank. And you take that into consideration, compare him to some of his contemporaries here, other Hall of Fame closers. This is how it stacked up through age 38. Now, obviously, there's a gap there. Wagner was behind Hoffman and Rivera, but those two guys racked up almost 300 more saves between the two of them from that point forward in their career. They both ended up over 600. So that gap ended up being a pretty significant one for their careers. But like I said, Wagner just chose to walk away. Basically, every team in the league would have been interested in him if he had stuck around past his age 38 season. But guys, I want to circle back to that batting average against and just how hard he was to hit. There was one guy that I found that kind of gave the blueprint for how to hit this guy. The only guy who took him deep 3 times, Tony Bautista.
Really?
This guy was so good from the left side that all you had to do to hit him apparently was have a completely wide open stance if you wanted to get around on Wagner's left-handed stuff. So there was a blueprint there. People just chose not to take it and hit like Tony Bautista. One of the more entertaining hitters to watch in the last handful of decades.
Who would have guessed that matchup would have favored Tony Bautista? Hey, I want to add to the Wagner discussion, and I love the board that you cooked up there, Keith, with, of course, the 2 benchmarks for Hall of Fame relievers in Hoffman and Rivera. Comparing any reliever to those guys is similar to comparing any hitter's line to that of Mays and Aaron. They're the 2 gold medal standards. You almost have to throw them out because they take the outlier thing way too far to the north. So if you're to include the following group, Bruce Sutter, Lee Smith, Raleigh Fingers, Billy Wagner has as many save opportunities, in fact, more than that group, with a higher save percentage than those guys. Also, Hall of Fame relievers. I get, and Harold's argument is always good, that it's the era in which they played, and it was a different generation certainly for Sutter and Fingers than it was for Mo and Trevor. But Billy Wagner falls right in between that group of 5 guys. Hoffman and Rivera, gold medal standards, then it's Wagner, and then you still have Hall of Famers in Sutter, Smith, and Fingers whose numbers aren't as big, aren't as good as Billy Wagner. Not to mention, and I know this stuff doesn't count toward a Hall of Fame vote per se, but his story is unbelievable. I mean, this guy grew up he had it tough. Let's just put it that way. Among the physical adversities that he overcame, twice broke his right arm playing football as a kid. Twice. It's the only reason he was a left-handed pitcher is because he couldn't use his right arm anymore and learned to become a left-handed pitcher. Good dude. Like, I'd be a terrible Hall of Fame voter because I'd vote for guys I like, and I like Wags because knew him from way back in the minors. And even without that, I could make a very compelling case, as you just did, that he should be in the Hall of Fame.
Well,
Go ahead, H.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick, and I'll get it right back to you, Keith. But, back to your point of the other guys that were in his group, so to speak. It's like Ricky Henderson and Tim Raines. Ricky Henderson, all the stolen bases, killed Tim Raines for years.
Yeah.
Throw Ricky out.
Yes.
And look at the greatness of Tim Raines, and he got into the Hall of Fame. And the same thing with Billy Wagner. Billy Wagner made his teams better. When he got the ball, they were going to win. And it's just a whole different thing for me when I watched Billy Wagner pitch. He was at that time where, he'd gone away from the 3 or 4 inning saves to, hey, Billy Wagner's in the 9th, the game is over. It was in that starting to turn over thing. And he didn't blow many opportunities like that.
Hey, look.
He won games, man.
As recently as his last year in AAA in '96, they were really considering him as a starting pitcher. the Astros. And he was a starter in AAA until he finally got there, and they're like, yeah, no chance. This guy needs to close games. And finally, before we go to JP, I'll leave it on this, Keith. Because he had impactful years in New York and Philly, I don't know that there's one uniform. It would be the Astros. It should be the Astros. One team that's going to advocate for him the way, as we've talked about many times in the past, the Red Sox advocated for Jim Rice, the Brewers for Robin Yount. You know, you have that one uniform, and you get the brand behind you pushing the doors in Cooperstown. Wag should have that with the Astros, but there were other teams that he was so good for as well. So I want to get JP's take on this. And JP, I'm not sure if you're going to reveal whether or not you voted for Billy Wagner, but give us what you got here.
Matty, a little bit of news here from my perspective on Billy Wagner, because I have not always had room on my ballot to vote for him, but I am voting for him this year. Yes. I've always believed he's a Hall of Famer, so we can have that as a bit of news there, that I'm voting for Wagner this year. I've always believed in his credentials. I think he belongs in Cooperstown. As Keith documented brilliantly, one of the defining and dominant relief pitchers of his time. And I think as the ballot has gotten a little freer here in this certainly this round of balloting, you've got the space to be able to vote for people that you really feel strongly about. And for me, Wagner is that. And a final note, as I send it back to you, Matt, I love that in 2010, his final year, his last game was, of course, with Bobby Cox. So that was Bobby Cox's last year as the manager of the Braves, a young Craig Kimbrell and a young Johnny Venters that he was mentoring there in the Braves bullpen. So to your point, he certainly went out at the very peak of his powers.
Well, Matty, it seems like we have a consensus here, clean sweep, JP on his actual ballot, all three of us on our theoretical ballots. But just in the spirit of transparency and providing a full case, we'll throw out one negative for our guy Dog, who follows this show. He's always talking about how Billy Wagner never got a big out in his career because of his postseason struggles. Now, those numbers are hard to disagree with, but I don't think 11 innings overrides a whole career. But there it is. If you're a no on Wagner, maybe that's something you're hanging your hat on.
That's a typical elitist New Yorker view at a guy who only played a couple years for the Mets. That's you know, Dog was putting that same garbage out there for Hoffman. So forget it. I'm not buying any of that. He should be in the building.
I was just teeing you up for the soundboard. I didn't expect you to get this riled up. I'm sorry, Matty.
I hate that's the.
I'm going just straight up Matt doing Dog. How would he say it?
Hall of Fame. You should be in the Hall of Fame. That's one of his greatest phrases, by the way. There are many words that I enjoy coming out of the Dog's mouth, but when he talks about the Hall of Fame, it's possibly my favorite. Billy Wagner is for the Hall of Fame, voters. Come on, consider that if you haven't already gotten your ballots in. And by the way, Ryan Thibodeau's Hall of Fame tracker has him just under 75% right now, with, again, very few ballots actually revealed for his work. Let's take a break. Fired up there. When we come back, win, lose, or